special education exiting, and child count. We're going to talk a little bit about child count. Notice the date is December 7th. We want to pull the data because we're pulling it from the state now. We want to pull that as close to December 1st as possible. So hopefully we won't have any major glitches due to COVID-19. We'll see what happens. But this is, we'll talk about that in a minute. So. Okay, the first thing is indicators 11 and 13. I sent out the spreadsheet, I don't know, maybe a week or two ago. It was brought to my attention this morning, which was pretty good timing, that on the spreadsheet, it says to email it to KDE, which is not true. Please do not email it because it has student personally identifiable information on it. So please upload it to the DOS Secure File Transfer site. And it also says to email it to your co-op director. And you don't need to do that either. That was from before, from a long time ago. And honestly, I've been sending this thing out for so many years, I hadn't even noticed that that's on there anymore. So please don't do that. They don't need it. And again, we don't want to be sending the personal identifiable information over email. So the spreadsheets have been emailed. I haven't heard of any major issues with them this year, which is good. There were a few minor changes to indicator 11. So one of the changes is last year we added this reason for exceeding timeline. And we want you actually, when you fill it out, if you're going to be over timeline, to explain why under each one of these items. So availability of evaluation personnel, and then put in there which evaluation personnel. Just be specific. You don't have to write a book, just something that explains what's going on. We did add a column for students who could not be evaluated due to COVID-19. And we're asking you to list specifically what could not be completed. So here's an example for, like WISC 4 has to be done face-to-face. Most evaluations are going to have to be done face-to-face. So you can just write in there what couldn't be done. I did have a district ask me yesterday if you don't know, like if you haven't completed the evaluation, so you don't know how many days over timeline you're going to be. I guess either just put through the end of this year or put a question mark here or something, because you're not going to know. So just do the best you can. This number right here, if it's 1 or if it's 100, we prefer it not to be 100 if you can help it. But this number just tells us you're over timeline. So, just do the best you can with that. And the SPED evaluation report, detail report, the other thing I want to tell you about with that is that when you run this report, if students are not appearing on the report that you feel like should be on the report, it is most likely because the consent for initial evaluation, the date of consent for initial evaluation in the consent for evaluation form has not been filled in. So that's a training issue. We cannot, I have asked and I've been told no every time to make that a required field, because they can't make it required because there's a date for initial and a date for reeval, and it can't be both. So you need to just make sure your teachers know to fill that in. And again, just do the best you can. Keep your own list. That's what I would recommend doing, is keep your own list and just try to match them up and see what's going on. Okay. Personnel and placement. So personnel data used to be a spreadsheet that I would send out, and you would fill it out and submit it with the December 1 file. But starting, I think, last school year or 2 years ago maybe, we started collecting it in GMAP. And this is something that I think there's been a lot of confusion on this. we collect data on teachers, paraprofessionals, and related service providers who are contracted to work with students with disabilities, ages 3 through 21. And this is on December 1st. So what you're going to give me is the list of students, I'm sorry, of staff who are working with students with disability on December 1st, or employed to work with students with disabilities on December 1st. So I think there's been a lot of confusion with that. So we ask that you report the FTE in each category of these. So it's broken down by, it used to be highly qualified and not highly qualified, not certified and not fully certified. So this is what we collect, and again, on December 1st. If you have a teacher that only
Amy,
works
can
with,
I interrupt
yeah,
you real quick?
sure.
Sorry. Somebody asked, do we go back to this past December 1st, 2019? Is that correct?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. Thank you. That's a good question. So if a student only works with, if a student works with, I'm sorry, if a teacher works with students with disabilities half the time and students without disabilities half the time, only report it as 0.5. If you have a part-time teacher, only report the FTE that they work with students with disabilities. So you're just going to, and you're just going to be, I realize you're going to have to estimate. You can round to the 100th of a decimal, and just do the best you can with that. But again, so if you have 3 teachers who work with students with disabilities half time, so that would be 0.5 plus 0.5 plus 0.5, which, and then you're going to add them together to get 1.5. Oh, there's an example. Okay, so works with students with disabilities for 3 hours out of a 6-hour day, so that's a half FTE. And then there's another one who works 4 hours out of a 6-hour day, so that's 0.67, it's 2/3. And then you add those together, so you would have 1.17 FTE. So I hope that makes sense. And this says teacher, but the same is going to be true for related service providers and for paraprofessionals. They're broken down in different. Linda Alford asked if we include preschool staff. Yes, that's in a separate, we collect them separately, so yes. Okay. So this is an example. What this is it's a spreadsheet that actually Chris Thacker created to mirror what's in GMAP. I have this available. I was asked not to send it out because I was told that it would confuse people if I send it out. But if you want it, I can send it to you when we're preparing for December 1. So you can put all your information here and just hold on to it, and then take that information and put it into GMAP when that opens up in May. Because I realize it's hard to remember in May, excuse me, in May, who you had employed in December, because people may come and go. Or who they were, how many students with disabilities they were working with, et cetera. So this is something I can send out if you want. So, but this is what it looks like. So you have a count of special education teachers. So it's broken down 3 through 5 fully certified, 3 through 5 who are not fully certified. I think this should say 6 through 21. 6 through 21 who are fully certified, 6 through 21 who are not fully certified, and so on. I think I need to fix that. And then we also collect private school proportionate data. So this also used to be part of the same spreadsheet where we ask you which students live in your district who may be eligible for IDEA. And this helps KDE calculate your private school proportionate amount and how much you need to allocate for that. So again, this is part of the same spreadsheet. It's also collected in GMAP at the same time. Yes, Joanne, sorry about that. It should say 6 to 21. I just realized that I need to go back and fix it. Thank you. So, any questions up to this point? Is there anything I missed? Okay. Okay, so the Safe Schools report. So this one, we've been collecting this data for about 3 years now through the Safe Schools report. And so what I did, I have a lot of people ask me how to run it. So I set this up to show basically all you're going to do is you're going to go to Kentucky State Reporting and run Safe Schools. I don't know, probably not all directors of special ed have access to this. I would recommend that they do, because you all are the ones with the most to lose or gain through this report, I think. So to run the Safe Schools report, you're going to highlight all of all the schools. And so it's a little bit different this year, because this year they've set it up to, instead of if the student had an IEP on December 1st, it's if the student had an IEP at the time of the incident, on the date of the incident. So again, this doesn't preclude, basis of knowledge. If a student is being referred for special ed, they're still, even if they didn't have an IEP, you need to be keeping track of that. But so if the student had an IEP on the day that the behavior event occurred, or the resolution occurred, actually, no, I think it's a behavior event, then they will show as special ed on the report. So for special ed students, you just click this active special ed at time of incident and click run extract. And the other thing I want to point out that I don't think I have anywhere else in this PowerPoint is up here at the extract type. Normally it would just say detail, and that's what it defaults to, and that's what you're used to. But now there's also an aggregate report that you can run for district and for school that'll give you like counts of students instead of individual student information. So that might be helpful to you as well. So there are new calculations. Everything is rounded to the hundredth, to the nearest hundredth of a day. And again, the IEP at time of incident. And then you're going to verify this at this link right here, surveymonkey.com, 2020 Safe Schools SPED. So this is where you're going to verify that you have reviewed the data. And it is very important that you review the data. Things to look for, you want to look for long restraints and long suspensions. Sometimes there are long suspensions, and that's okay. But sometimes they are miscoded. Sometimes I've seen already 2 instances of students with disabilities listed expelled without services. And both of those were mistakes. They were supposed to be SSP3, which is out of school removal. And so I just contacted the district and had them fix it. But these are things I try to catch these, but it's very difficult for me to catch them for everyone in the state. So, and you all know your data a lot better than I do. So it's important that you all look at it. You want to look at unreasonable data, multi-day restraints. You want to look at the same instance, the same event entered 3 times, because I've seen that. I've seen a 1-day suspension entered 3 different times. I guess 3 different people did it maybe. I'm not exactly sure, but it was the same exact incident. And so the student was listed as being removed for 3 days instead of 1 day, which can add up very quickly. I am going to try to do a webinar just on Safe Schools at some point. Right now, there's still some calculations that need to be run. that the district needs to run a report to make sure all the data is accurate, and at this point it's not. I see Donna Combs is asking, would it be unreasonable data if there is no number in the resolution length? So if there's no number in the resolution length, if there's nothing there, then that means one of the days, either the begin date or the end date, is either a non-instructional day or the student has withdrawn. So if a student, let's say a student has a 10-day removal and he moves after the third day and doesn't come, he like withdraws from the district, then the student doesn't have an enrollment, so it would leave it blank. Or if one of those days was a snow day or a weekend or a holiday, either the start date or the end date, then that's going to show up as a blank as well. So that's a good question. This is something that Caroline and I were talking about. If a resolution overlaps with an NTI day, and I know we've had lots of those this year, make sure that the Safe Schools report shows that services are being provided during the NTI. I'm assuming they are. So if you have a student being removed through the end of the year, but the student is on NTI and receiving normal services, then you probably want to back that suspension up, the end date of the suspension. Okay, this is the tool I was talking about. Districts need to run this, and I think it has to be the the Safe Schools Administrator. But, oh, I'm sorry, that's not it, I guess. Anyway, there's a data calculation tool to update the time. They made some changes in the calculations, and so time is not being calculated appropriately right now. So please make sure, I think I sent out an email about this. Please make sure your Safe Schools Administrator has run that so that we can get all the data correct so I can start reviewing it. There are data visualizations that are available now. Again, this is really important for special ed, for directors of special ed, because we had this created just for you. So there's a link right here on this PowerPoint for the data visualization information on our website. You'll probably need to talk to your cases administrator if you don't have access to it, but it's really helpful. So this is what it looks like. So when you click on it, and it will show up just like as a link at the top of your Infinite Campus. It'll show a student how many days of in-school removal, how many days of out-of-school removal, and it'll show it to the nearest hundredth. This shows it to the nearest tenth, but it's an old screenshot. So it'll show it to the nearest hundredth of a day, and so it'll show the total. So this student right here, the first student, had 10 days in school and 8.8 days out of school for a total of 18.8 days. If you notice on the right-hand side, you can sort or filter just for students with disabilities. The default is 8 days, but you can move this little slider down here. You can move it back, so it'll show you any students that have been removed. We defaulted it to 8 days just to show, students that are getting close to 10 that districts need to be aware of. But this is very helpful in looking at your data. It's not sorted in any way that I can tell. I asked that it be sorted from most days removed to least. I don't think there's a way to do that, but you can also sort by school. You can sort by grade or race or gender. There are all kinds of things you can do with this. It's very helpful. Okay, so questions. Did I understand this correctly? All suspension days or ISS days? Caroline, Can you speak to that question from Vicki?
Sure. So I think what you're asking is where Safe Schools is just going to pick up if they have an IEP at that time. So you are still going to need to consider, were there any days before the student was identified for special ed when you had a basis of knowledge? So you have to think about, did we have a basis of knowledge? Had we started the referral process, so we had a basis of knowledge from that, but the student hasn't actually qualified yet, then you would need to consider those suspension days as well when you were thinking towards a change in placement, moving past 10 days. Do we need to have a manifestation? Does that help answer your question? And then if Vicki, if you have specifics you want to talk through, okay, you said great, it does. If you have specifics, feel free to call us outside of this and we can talk through those with you specifically.
And Bridget asked, is the data visualization the same as Tableau? And yes, it is. It's the same. I'm talking about the same thing. So, and there is more information on our website at that link. You can just go into the KDE website and do a search for data visualization, and it'll give you information about it. So I did a training, a beginning of year training for CASIS administrators with Wendy Newton, Victoria Fields, and I think maybe, I don't remember if anybody else was involved, but to talk about behavior data collection. And I thought I probably ought to share some of this with you. So the definition of in-school removal includes lunch, recess, and study periods. So this has been agreed upon by everyone at KDE, including the commissioner. And this came down from the Office of Special Education Programs under the U.S. Department of Education. So you will need to be entering those as well. Another thing is in-district removal. So the in-district removal is if a student is removed, has a quote in-school removal, so he isn't sent home, but he is sent to a school outside of his regular school. So an alternative school or whatever. According to, again, the Office of Special Education Programs and the definitions that we have to report under, that is considered for students with IEPs to be an out-of-school removal. So this is how it's going to be reported. It's going to be reported as an in-district removal. And we will, when we are doing our monitoring, and it's always been monitored that way anyway. This isn't anything new. It wasn't recorded that way. So when we do our monitoring, this will count as an in-school removal. For students without disabilities, without an IEP, this will count as an in-school removal. So, and then I think also to deal with the lunch, recess, and study periods, they're going to do some different reporting for Safe Schools than we do for our federal reporting. Looks like we have a lot of questions on that. So let's see. What is the definition of study period? Study hall, I guess. I think it's going to
Amy,
differ.
can I
Yeah,
jump in there?
please.
This is Carol Ann. Basically, what that definition is trying to share with you is that anytime during the regular school day, so if you're scheduled to be at school from 8 to 4, and I'm just making up numbers, but 8 to 4, then anytime during that day that the child is removed, to another place within the school, it is an in-school removal. So it could be during lunch, it could be during recess. When we say study period, so it doesn't have to be just a core content class. Any of those times throughout the day, it would be entered as a removal if you have an in-school removal. Does that help?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Um, And so the question is, does it count toward the 10 days of suspensions? Yes, it does. But in-school removals have always counted toward the 10 days of suspensions unless they meet those 3 guardrails, which I may or may not have in this PowerPoint, but I will send out. If the alternate program is on site. I think that's probably, Caroline, is that probably a question we need to have individually?
Amy, I believe it's the same. So if it's
Thank you.
a program, if it's like a school within a school, it would still count as an INDR because they're not in their typical program. This is Sylvia, by the way.
Okay, yeah.
So I would say anytime your student is serving whatever at a place other than their typical school, you would put an INDR. Even if that's a program with a program, if it's a school within the same school they were at, they've moved programs, essentially they're not in the same program they were in before, that would make it an INDR.
Thank you.
And then, Amy, I think there was a question as well. Is this for an IAES? This is different than IAES. So you might want to clarify.
Yeah, so an IAES can only occur with those, quote, big 3, weapons, drugs,
weapons, or serious bodily injury.
So serious bodily injury. And again, those have to be very serious, right? Like the weapon has to be a gun or a blade longer than how many inches?
2.5 inches.
2.5
All
inches.
of it is laid out in Kentucky regulations. So if you have questions about how to get a hold of those things, I'm happy to send that out, or you can ask me and I will be happy to send you to the places that really do it. But it's very, when we talk about serious bodily injury, it's very serious. It's not like you're a broken arm. It's more like your arm is no longer connected to your body kind of serious bodily injury. But like I said, any of those questions, you can direct those to myself or Caroline, and we'll be happy to individually walk you through those.
Okay, I'm getting a lot more questions on this. I feel like maybe we should move on and come back to these because I think a lot of these questions, I'm not saying I'm not going to answer your question. I didn't mean it that way. But I think these questions, we may have to do some talking about them and get more guidance. And again, I'm planning on doing before the end of summer, like hopefully in the next month or so, a training on just safe schools. So hopefully we'll be able to answer those questions then. I would ask that you send me any questions you have either through this chat or an email so that we can, Sylvia and Caroline and I can talk about them and get you answers. So, and I'll come back if we have time at the end. I'll come back and answer more if I can. So, so the 2021, and this, remember these INDR is for next school year. So this hasn't occurred yet. It will start next school year. This is in the new behavior data standards, which if they're not up now, will be soon because I just reviewed them last week or the week before last. So I don't know about you guys, but time seems to be squishy these days. It's hard to tell what day it is. But I did review them recently, so they should be up soon. Yeah, so here's how the reporting is going to look. INSR and INDR will be included on the Safe Schools report. School report card will aggregate those, and school report card will not include any removals less than half a day. But we will in our reporting. Okay, exiting. Students ages 14 to 21 who exit special education. So remember, a couple of things to remember with exiting. First of all, it's only students who are ages 14 to 21. The second thing to remember is if the student was not enrolled on the first day of school, then he or she will not show up on the exiting report unless they were a no-show. If they were listed as a no-show on the first day of school, they will. So to run this report, runs KY State Reporting Special Ed Exit Report. This is the same report we've been running for decades, I think. You can also use the QA SPED report to get information. If you run the QA SPED report, it's the error report, the QA SPED error report. It will give you information about if a student has an IEP that exists outside of this school year. And so then you can go back and clean that up. You do not need to send me that. Just verify that you've reviewed it. I will pull it at the state level. And actually the report I run actually shows fewer errors. Like if you have an error on yours, it may not show up on mine at all. So yeah, but please feel free to email me with questions about the exit report. It's kind of, I don't know, it's always tricky because we don't think about it all year long, and then all of a sudden we have to think about it, and it's hard to keep track of it. So exit report validation, only students ages 14 to 21 as of December 1st on that school year. You should never have any DD students because you shouldn't have any 9-year-old students on there, or 8-year-old students on there. So if a student is 14 years old and has a disability of DD, then there's a problem. There shouldn't be any blank cells. The only blank cells could be the English proficiency. I think it's either EL or LAP. I don't remember what it's called. It's one way in some reports and another way in other reports. And then if the student transferred to regular education, then they're not going to have an end date and an end status because they didn't leave the school. They just transferred to regular ed. So, okay. Any questions? Okay. Child count. So you've seen many of these slides before. I have cleaned them up a little bit. The best news of all is that December 1st is not on a Saturday or a Sunday this year. It's a Tuesday, I believe. So we won't have the issues we had last year, which makes me very happy. So student has to be enrolled in the district on December 1st, 2020. So the big thing to keep in mind there is if the student withdrew on November 30th and re-enrolled in a different school in the district on December 2nd, that student's not going to count on child count. So you need to fix that in your enrollment. Either have them start on December 1st or end dated on December 1st. Because if it skips that, they won't show up on the report. The student has to have a locked IEP with a status of A, AR, or I. ER will not show up. If you amend to end the report, this shouldn't be a problem. So, because you'll still have the original IEP with the active status on December 1st. And then the evaluation eligibility determination date has to be 3 years before the child count date. So, okay, this is new this year. Y'all ready for this? This came down from above. Students who have an N-type enrollment should not be marked state exclude starting next school year. So you can get money for that kid. If he's only in your district for 15 minutes once a week, you can get money for that 15 minutes once a week. Plus you're going to be counting him on child count. So they have told us to tell you all if the student has a N-type enrollment, so private school student receiving special education services, do not mark the student state exclude starting next school year. And so any enrollments that roll forward, you probably want to go back and check those. I don't know, because we are running the report out of, we're running December 1 child count out of Infinite Campus this year at the state level. So I don't know if they are going to be pulling state exclude students, but I think they're probably not going to. So I'm gonna try to get on this early and make sure we all agree on which students are supposed to be on child count, but that's something you need to be aware of. Somebody have a question? Okay. All right. This is the other thing. If a student will be 5 years old in kindergarten on December 1st, so in the past, if a student was 5 years old, regardless of whether they were preschool or kindergarten, they were a 3, they had an LRE beginning with 3, so 3A1, 3A2, 3B1, whatever. Now, if the student is in kindergarten, we're going to use a special ed setting beginning with 6, so 6A, 6B, whatever. So that started December 2nd of 2019. So it's, we may have some cleaning up to do with this, but we'll worry about that when the time comes, I guess, but you probably want to go back and check. And I'll run a report when school starts up again in the fall and see how many students we have that are mislabeled. If the 5-year-old will be in preschool on December 1st, choose a special education setting beginning with 3. So if the student is in preschool, you're still going to use that 3 enrollment. And for some 5-year-olds, for most 5-year-olds, you're actually going to have a choice of both because of the way, because of the way the 5-year-olds run, you're going to have a choice between the two. So, and Andrea's here, I think, to answer questions on that if we have any. For out-of-state students, when a student moves in from out of state just before the child count date, you're going to create a valid Kentucky Evaluation Eligibility Determination document, and then lock that, put all the information in from the receiving state, or the sending state, and then create a valid IEP based on that information that the state sends. So you're not going to be using your information, you're going to be using the information you get from the state, and then you're going to determine Kentucky eligibility and create a whole new set of documents with the Kentucky information. Will we also get pre-K credit for the N status students? That's a good question. Yeah, Andrea.
So typically, no, our process will not change. So those kids that are marked in Infinite Campus that receive special ed only, you still get IDEA funding for them, but you will not receive state preschool dollars for those students. Our process has not changed with that.
It was a nice thought, though. Thank you.
I mean, it would be lovely, but
yes, yes, but we don't get to make that choice. Okay, so for out-of-state students, only official documents. NIC will sync with the state, no fake documents, and no PDFs. And remember, the evaluation eligibility determination must be dated before the child count date. When you are releasing a student from special education services, especially if you release them after December 1st, like soon after December 1st, because, we're going to run the report on the 7th, the Monday after. But the issue is if it's not correct, and if we run it again, if like a district has, 15 students missing and we have to run it again, we have to run it again for the whole state. So in the meantime, if IEPs have been messed with, it's going to mess up our count for the other districts. So we're trying to keep everything accurate as long as possible into January. So when you end date an IEP after a student no longer qualifies for services, use amend the IEP to end date the IEP. And if you do that, then the original IEP will still be intact. We'll still have that active status on December 1st and should show up on child count without a problem. I've tested it out. It worked out great. If your district will not use amend, then just be careful on how you set up the status, because we want to make sure the student reports on December 1 if he was active on December 1. Students have to have, I just covered this, but I'm going to talk about it again. Students have to have an enrollment on December 1. This was a huge deal last year, and I don't think people realize, because it's kind of out of your hands. It's not, you all aren't the ones doing this. It's the DPPs or the enrollment people that are doing this. But students who unenroll on November 30th and re-enroll on December 2nd will not be included on child count report unless you go back and fix the enrollment. And if you can clean up that enrollment before December 1st, that would be awesome. But please at least clean it up before the Friday before the Monday after. So that would be December 4th, I think, this year. And I will do more reminders. I'll do more reminders for this, obviously, as time goes on. So I'm just giving you a heads up right now. Common errors, status, disability, or setting is blank. I've been running reports for other sort of monitoring things and APR indicators, and I've found a lot of blank disabilities. Most of them are speech. So I don't know if it's, I don't know what's going on. It very well could be because of the COVID craziness, and I get that, but I just want to give you a heads up. If you run the QA SPED error report, it will tell you which IEPs are unlocked and which ones are missing disabilities and all that. So it's a really good tool. QA SPED, it's underneath Kentucky State Reporting KDE reports, and it's called QA SPED. And then you have 3 choices. You have like aggregate, detail, and error, and you want to run the error report. It'll tell you everything you need to know to clean up your data. Status has to be set to A, AR, or I. Make sure LRE and age/grade match. And I will be helping you out with that this year, especially like more this year because of the new rules for the 5-year-olds. Okay, so here's our plan. It was a little crazy last year. I'm hoping we won't have as much craziness this year, but my plan is we are going to run it on December 7th. I am going to try to send out results to you guys on December 7th to say this is the students we have. Our students should match your students. And hopefully we can all agree and everything will be great. I realize that, you know, that's a perfect world. So it's going to be trial and error, and I appreciate your patience while we're working through this. But I want to make sure all students are included. So, you know, try to keep your data as accurate as possible, and I will keep communicating with you. Okay, students who have an enrollment of, I already said this, of special ed only and should not be marked as state exclude. The child count report will ignore students enrolled in calendars that are marked exclude. So this is something we've had an issue with, especially preschool. If a student is enrolled in an excluded calendar, and needs to be counted on child count, that student needs to be enrolled with an N enrollment in a school that's not excluded, in a calendar that's not excluded. So we can talk more about that as we go, but we have to find ways to do this for the entire state. And so we all have to have the same rules. And I can't pick and choose, I'm going to run this school, but not this one. I have to have some kind of rule. So we're looking at calendars. And there weren't very many districts that had students underneath excluded calendars that should have been counted. Most of them had enrolled the students in a non-excluded calendar. So hopefully, hopefully we'll be able to fix this before December. And I'll be doing more training on that as well. And I'll probably include our OET people who have a better handle on calendars than I do. Private school students. One thing that we ran across this year is students within enrollments. A lot of times they'll enroll in kindergarten and they will be enrolled for 8 years and they're still in kindergarten 8 years later, which really shouldn't be a problem, but when we're looking at the child count report, it is, because they'll still show up, but if it looks like we have a student who is 15 years old in kindergarten, that throws up red flags and it causes problems with reporting. So please just make sure you're in enrollments, roll forward, and have accurate grades. All students with private school service plans should have a setting of 6J. So their LRE setting, and I'm trying to get this fixed, so that's the only option. But the special ed setting for a student with a private school service plan should only be 6J. It shouldn't be 6A, it shouldn't be 6C, because the definition of private school service plan is they were placed in a private school by their parents. So please double check that, and again, I'm trying to get that fixed in IC, so that is not an issue. Okay, let's see. Carol said, can you review amending the IEP when a student is released? What date should we put in it? And do we put released as reason and then click complete? Yeah, so I would say transfer to regular education or whatever. And the date, I would put the last day the student received services. Caroline or Sylvia, do you have anything other than that to say? You good with that?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay. All right. And if you are using auto end for when you create a new IEP, that's the best situation. It's not going to fix the students transferring to regular ed, but it will fix a lot of overlaps and that kind of thing, and that'll help. And I haven't talked to a single district that's had problems with it, so hopefully it's working well. So I would recommend using it. And that's all. I have a new set of data standards coming out soon, hopefully in the next week or two. They're in the process of being reviewed right now. And I'll let you know when they come out, but that includes information on auto end and amend to end and all that kind of stuff. So not much. There weren't a whole lot of changes in the data standards, but I did add that. Okay. So let's see, what else do I need to tell you? I have a list of resources for COVID-19 here. These are all resources that were already out there. I think they're all on our website. You've probably seen them, but I just thought I'd include them. Some of them are from USAID, some of them are Kentucky related. We have some webcasts. So open it up for questions. I told you it'd be an hour and we've done pretty well. No questions? Okay, cool. If you know how to get a hold of me, if you have questions, you can call my work number. It'll ring to my it'll ring to my computer here at home. So I'm happy to. I'll answer those. And you know my email address. Any possibilities of a form NIC for the contingency plans for COVID-19?
This is Sylvia. Right now, that's not something that we have developed. And any kind of thing that goes through IC actually has a pretty long history of how we have to get through it. So I would be doubtful that that's something that we could pull off by the time you guys needed it in the fall. But we'll keep up with you and provide more guidance on what contingency planning looks like and how to do that in the future. But I don't know that there will be a form in IC. Good question, though.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I know this was quick. I do plan on doing one on the Safe Schools report, and I plan on doing one in the fall to talk more about child count and those sorts of things. But if you have any questions, let me know. I'll hang on here a minute just to see if anybody else has questions. Hey, Linda, if a student has a private school service plan, you shouldn't have an IEP. You should only have the private school service plan. So really 6J should only be private school service plan, I think. I can't think of an instance where it would be for, oh, she's not on. Hey, Linda, can you hear me? Oh, hi, Amber.
Amy, I think she said it's Amber. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Amber. Anyway, yeah, so I can't think of an instance where an IEP would have a 6J setting. There might be one. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. So.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you, Amy.
No problem. Anytime.
Amy, we appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you all.
All right. Have a good day. Stay well.
Thanks. You too.